Matt, did you get that email I just sent you? I want to talk about this piece in the Tribune about Denmark for a few minutes. A couple people have asked me, if you've already bought a ticket to the Austin show, you got to contact the venue directly, and they will either fully refund you or they will switch your tickets. Hope everybody who's asked me that is listening or watching. We'll talk about this Denmark thing. Then I got another piece of reading to do. Okay, yeah, this is Tribune. By the way, everybody should be reading Tribune.
Speaking of George Orwell.
Speaking of George Orwell, and our good buddy edits it, actually. Really, really good journalist. Ronan Burtonshaw.
Oh, right.
But anyways, I just want to really be specific about this. Denmark's answer to the coronavirus recession. And of course, they're contrasting with the UK, which is the closest to the United States in the world in terms of just this total neoliberal rot and absolute destruction of public services and solidarity. Can you scroll down a bit, Matt? I just want to read this. This Sunday, the Danish government struck a historical deal with trade unions and employer associations to stop mass layoffs during the quarantine. During the next 6 months, the state will cover 75% of wages of workers threatened by job loss, up to £2,800. Companies will cover the remaining 25%, while workers will give up 5 days of paid holiday time. In other words, work 5 days for free. The deal covers companies who would have to lay off at least 30% of their staff or 50 or more staff. In return, companies commit to not lay off any staff for economic reasons while they're receiving state compensation. And then just, this is one major part of it. You could scroll down. There's a few other things. The deal shows the resilience of the Danish model of the tripartite employment relations, which has been declared dead on many occasions during the last decade. However, though it gives a boost to Denmark's social democratic version of corporatism, it remains under attack. And it just, goes down and down. I think there's actually another thing that's going to be important in the discourse. Because when the left was completely dead in the United States, and I think quite understandably, folks like Bernie Sanders, I agree with Harvey K. I think there should be more FDR and Eugene Debs and MLK and Adolf, and A. Philip Randolph and so on. Absolutely. But there was a reason why people would talk about the success of different things in places like Denmark and Sweden, because those were contemporary examples of relatively analogous countries, right? And that sort of praising of the European model has come under attack from many different fronts. I mean, one, because more broadly, we see the contradictions of capitalism. We see that those settlements are never really fully settlements. We've seen the European model come under a lot of stress. Then there's also people who've rightly pointed out all of the enormous contradictions inside European societies, including particularly various xenophobic and anti-refugee and anti-immigrant, sort of hardline policies, and the success of certain, literally neo-fascist parties. And also, questioning the differences between the United States and so on. And I'm someone who's always thought, actually, the United States left, frankly, should be looking much more to Latin America and things to learn from, leaders like Pepe Mujica or Lula, frankly. But at the same time, I think this is a moment when you look at what's happening in Denmark or France to remind ourselves, okay, all of this complexity and critique is important, but these are also the best places in the world to live right now. And yes, there's a colonial history. Yes, there's an imperial history. Yes, there's all these critiques. There's also dynamic and powerful labor movements. And there's also some really, really, really smart and effective left governance that has created great outcomes for people. And we're all going to need to learn from. And we can all see a basic expectation set that has been set. By the way, in the same way, in a completely different way, there's a lot to learn from Singapore's response to this, frankly, right? So we have to have that real cosmopolitan global attitude that really is realistic and frankly, seeing what's right about Europe as an example, what's right about South Korea, what's right about Singapore, as well as all the things that are wrong. But I really want to emphasize that, like, if you live in Denmark right now, and I won't, I'll stipulate there's legitimate critiques and there's important conversations and blah 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 blah, but there's a baseline that's been set, and we need to really emphasize that it's important for the broader ideological war, in terms of acknowledging what literally has been accomplished and what people can and should expect, and demand, because in the Richard Wolff sense, this isn't the altruism. That's the other problem with like these liberal explanations of it. These places are not, it isn't like they all sat down and were like, hey, we're homogenous societies, let's be nice to each other. That might help ease some of the barriers, but the bottom line is the reason is because of enormously powerful labor union movements and serious social democratic governance, not because of like the niceness of people's hearts. Like that's not how this stuff works.
I think that's a really important
materialist
distinction. Yeah, because I mean, you're seeing the places that are getting like you're seeing the deficiencies in societies basically being tested. For example, in China, the fact that they hid the virus for so long, they were prosecuting and coming after people who were whistleblowers. That's a huge deficiency in their society. Then on the other hand, their ability to build up a hospital with 1,000 beds, in like a week is, something that's the Chinese ability and their capacity. South Korea has those kind of contradictions and solutions too. I mean, I've been hitting on this a lot with people. The big difference, I think, South Korea is looking like a model of something that, a system that's starting to work with dealing with it. And I think one thing that at least was heartening to me was their initial pledge that they're not going to prosecute illegal immigrants. I know that's not the word we use anymore, but
but whatever, that's the point, is actually the policy.
They're not going to prosecute them, and
this is a great section of the racism of our immigration policies. And
meanwhile, we're literally ISIS has been camping outside of terrorizing people. I mean, it's horrific. Not only that, they've been cracking down in New York City and Boston in the past 2 weeks, and specifically over the last few days. ICE agents wearing masks because they understand it's a crisis, right? So they're like preparing for it on that level, but there's no humanity to realize, this is a horrible.
No, it's necrophiliac murder politics.
Yeah,
I want to really underline that. And that's actually, in a way. I'm sorry, David, I don't want to get off the tangent, but in a way, like that's actually these terms which have atrophied in their potency, like racist or reactionary, or frankly, even fascist. And sometimes because, again, a lot of these institutions and people now wear those titles relatively proudly. That's a different political dynamic we're in. Other times because, I think, people aren't careful enough and strategic enough about deploying things, and you got to be really, you have to have precision in your attack. But, I want to create like the next vocabulary to also explain like what that ICE policy is. And that is not, by the way, figuring out the nuances of how do you have a humane border policy, but recognize there's still going to be borders. Like these are important high level conversations. The ICE policy and ICE as an institution is a murder institution. It's a whatever we need to generate the next stage of hyperbole to very specifically diagnose that. An empowered government institution sweeping and terrorizing and splitting up families right now, which was always just as sick, always just as despicable, always just as unacceptable, but now really amplified in the context of a public health crisis. And that's one of the reasons I think we actually do need to be precise about these terms, is the paradox, because we actually also need to still have like the explosive impact of really saying what something is. That's not a policy disagreement. That's not even like a different worldview about how we balance internationalism and the state and the post-state. All this stuff is important and fascinating and blah, blah, blah. And it is important. But that policy, along with myriad of other policies that have come from ICE and the Department of Homeland Security, and frankly, the Patriot Act, and going well back to the Bush administration in some areas, and extended under Obama and generated into this white supremacist apparatus under Trump, that specifically and concretely needs to be interrogated on specific terms. Anyways, I hope that makes some sense.
Oh no, I think so too.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I mean, we're sort of talking broadly right now. I think it's important on our side that, we're able to use language in a way that establishes scale.
Right.
I think that you're right. Is like when we make certain claims, like they need to have the weight that they deserve. And in this moment, it should be absolutely clear what is going on with ICE, and I think that that's an important point about ICE, and I'm not trying to. It's all connected in the sense that too, like in the same way that this is wicked and cruel towards ICE, the fact that we're expecting so many Americans, people, I mean, we talk about this all the time on the show, how financially strapped most people are. We're expecting so many people to be able to just stay at home and, like, what they're talking about, aid packages or some kind of plan, but there's nothing right now. And I know so many people who are very frightened. I've been talking to a lot of my friends, especially people who work in bar and restaurant situations, people who work in service industries. I mean, they don't have a plan. In the same way that Donald Trump is waging war against immigrants by, like, continuing these ICE raids against people, they're continuing to wage war against the poor people in this country. And that's the 100% of the way that we need to frame this. I mean, the fact there's plenty of people who are going to be able to get through this crisis fine. There's plenty of people with big ass houses and pools, and and they're well stocked. They're not going to have problems. But there's plenty of people too who last Wednesday didn't know how they were going to get groceries at the end of the week, and now their income has been slashed, and now they're at home and they don't know what to do, who are frightened.
And that is, in fact, these terms get so ridiculous, but that's violence. That is actually the part of, like, the original rhetorical purpose, is to show that, in fact, this economy is violence, it's murder, and it's killing. And I don't mean literal, like that's literal violence, like a tweet or all this other ridiculous nonsense that we've gotten into. I'm talking like literally, people's lives are cut short. People's lives are systemically devalued. And that's actually the other paradox, right? Is like, how do you simultaneously, get much more precise and less melodramatic with language, and then actually broaden the lens where we're like, this system is run by sickos. Like, this is disgusting. Like, Joe Biden saying no single payer is as obscene as anything that anybody said. It's up there. I mean, that's grotesque. That's horrifying. That's evil. That's murderous.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.